do I really have to?
Oh, yes.
But I really don't wanna.
It doesn't matter.
Oh, okay, fine. So love and relationships have always been a divisive thing in the Thomas fandom, to say the least. And it used to be a very taboo thing to talk about. Like, it was always very universally accepted that it was just not a thing in Thomas. But why is that exactly? I mean, the engines are capable of feelings towards each other. Like, we all know that as a fact. Like, all the engines are very clearly capable of bonding, like Thomas and Percy are friends, and Gordon and Henry are friends. But as we know, friendships can often lead to relationships. And what's stopping Thomas and friends from taking that extra step? The show has had familial relationships and has had platonic relationships. But has it ever shown girlfriend-boyfriend relationships? Well, that's what we're going to go through today. And since it's the month of Valentine's, I figured why not do a video on this topic? And since Mechanical Shed already did a video about this, I thought it might be fun to bring him on the project too.
Hello everyone, Mechanical Shed here. So about a year ago, I did a video on how relationships were explored in Thomas. It was enough of an exploration to get the ball rolling, but I was missing little details that made things more conclusive. So,
in order to figure this out, I think we need to go back to Awdry's original metaphor for the engines. Now this is incredibly important to understanding the Thomas universe, but what the engines on Sodor essentially are is a metaphor for real steam engines, and what their feelings and their general emotions are. For example, when Edward first pushed Gordon up the hill, Gordon would say he can't do it, while Edward would say, oh yes you can, oh yes you can. This is very clearly a metaphor for what real banker engines would do helping another engine up the hill. That's where the basic metaphor for Thomas came from. It's the personification of these engines and their feelings towards each other and what they're doing. At its core, that is fundamentally what Thomas is all about. It's almost like humanizing the trains in a way. Anyone who's seen a train in real life will tell you that that particular train has a feeling to itself. It has its own character.
Steam engine, on the other hand, is an extrovert. Unless he's at rest with his fire drawn, he's always got something to say. He likes you to know how he's getting on and what he's feeling about things.
That's where the real engine's characteristics come from. Like Gordon, for example, who's an express engine and is considered high priority, so it would make sense that he'd have a very high and important characteristic of himself. Or this is even reflected in Thomas and Bertie, which is a personification of real rivalries that branch lines or buses would have.
Bus wankers!
And that's why pretty much every story that Awdry wrote was based on real events. Percy running away in the story was him being scared, but in reality, it was actually the driver and the fireman jumping off the footplate. What I'm basically getting at here is that everything that the characters feel or do is a reflection of how the real engines feel and what they are doing. So that begs the question, if engines can have feelings towards themselves and the engines around them, what's stopping them from loving each other in intimate ways? Well, there's a few things. First, just a practicality sense, like how are two engines meant to kiss, for example? Wouldn't the buffer beam just get in the way?
I think it's no question whether or not trains can love. In my eyes, they can. And by extension, so could buses, tractors, rolling stock, cranes, anything with a face. Even Owen can love if he wants to. But the line is drawn at physical intimacy.
But on a more metaphorical level, the engines don't have a reason to mate with one another. They are not like humans, where the reasons humans have a biological urge to mate is because of procreation for more humans. Engines aren't procreating more engines for the next generation. Like, this is not the Pixar Cars universe we're talking about here, this is the Thomas universe. I think the reason relationships don't really work in Thomas is because they are engines. They have working relationships or familial relationships. Like I said in my Gordon video, Bill and Ben see Edward as a father, or Henry and Gordon are like brothers, and Toby and Henrietta are like a wait a minute. Yeah, Henrietta and Toby are definitely the exceptions to rule, aren't they? Even people who don't like shipping characters in Thomas and Friends like Toby and Henrietta as a couple. I think the reason Toby and Henrietta work as a ship while other characters don't is because their dynamic still works within Awdry's metaphor for how engines work.
Locomotives always have something to say. There's the boastful, bustling express engine hauling a train of calm female carriages who, like dutiful wives, say, just as you say, yes dear, of course, just as you say, yes dear, of course, in order to make him think that they're listening to what he's got to say, but really one is quite sure that they're thinking about more important things, about when they're going to get a new coat of paint.
Like, Awdry even talks about how the coaches are like loving wives to the steam engines.
Thanks to a radio broadcast featuring Awdry, which went into his personification of trains in general, it's a given that at the very least, engines and coaches can be described as a married person's dynamic. See Toby and Henrietta.
They really are a good personification of a husband and a wife, albeit a very traditional view of a husband and wife, where Toby is essentially the breadwinner and Henrietta is like the accessory to him. But anyway, you can definitely see this reflected in the railway series, where all the steam engines are male and all the females are coaches. Like, it's very overt.
It's funny to think about, since while everyone's debating whether Thomas Trains should be getting romantic, there's a chance that Thomas has been seen with his spouses since the second the show first aired. Going by Awdry's words, Thomas would be in a polyamorous relationship with Annie and Clarabelle, and possibly the missing coach too. Another engine taking him out is essentially going on a train date, so no wonder Thomas goes nuts when anyone else works with them. Though, if that really is the case, it doesn't really show as well as it does with Toby and Henrietta. Those two are certainly the best realization of this idea Awdry had, especially in the later years. And there's also Duck with the slip coaches, who are probably long lost lovers reunited. I would say the same with Oliver and Toad, but he addresses everyone with such formality that Toad's just a professional gentleman break fan, or perhaps an evildoer pulling the strings behind the scenes. Anyway, my point with Toad being that it's definitely not a case of every engine's piece of rolling stock is automatically the spouse, and vice versa.
Now, while Awdry said the coaches are wives, I don't necessarily view them as such. Like, I think a better human metaphor for Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle is aunties. Like, Annie and Clarabelle feel like Thomas's aunties who are always looking out for him, you know? But this metaphor mumbo jumbo isn't the real reason you clicked on the video, is it? Nah. You want to see all the weird examples of the engines doing Kissy, Wissy, Lovey, Dovey stuff? Well, let's go through that. So the first example that springs to mind is Make Someone Happy, where after getting the bride a wedding package, she kisses Percy on the cheek, and then Thomas later teases him for it. This is the only example in the classic series where we have an albeit indirect hint of romance. Now, this is obviously just an allegory for when an adult female would give a young boy a kiss as a thank you, and that's even reinforced by the way that Thomas teases Percy.
"Did you like your kiss?" replied Thomas. But Percy was embarrassed and pretended to be asleep.
Percy is flattered that he got the kiss, but he isn't infatuated with the bride. It's the equivalent of a schoolboy getting a peck on the cheek, you know? A similar thing also happened in Free the Roads, where Bulgy gets a thank you kiss. Again, it's a very simple peck on the cheek situation, like it's not canon breaking or anything. Plus, it also kind of helps that Bulgy was in a fantasy sequence when it happened. However, when we get to some other CGI episodes, I think that's when things start to kind of break down a bit in the canon. I think I need to call out Davey Moore a bit here, because most of the episodes that I'm going to talk about are written by him. What I find interesting about Davey Moore's episodes was that he really flirted, no pun intended, with the idea of the engines having relationships. Like the episode The Switch very clearly has all this flirtation going on between Luke and Millie.
Got a smudgy face?
And then there's The Truth About Toby, again, a story all about Toby and Henrietta's relationship. And then there's an episode like Ryan and Daisy, where Daisy uses her powers of seduction against Ryan to get him to do her jobs.
You look great pulling the mail car. Really useful.
It's very Mrs. Robinson, you know, from the movie The Graduate, where you have this young male who's very inexperienced when it comes to relationships, and Mrs. Robinson, this older woman, who's trying to take advantage of him.
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me.
You know, that's essentially what's happening here with Ryan and Daisy.
After reading the comments that were left on that last video, there was this suggestion that a couple of engines who may work on a branch line together could be a couple, and I can definitely see that being a development for Ryan and Daisy. Like, I'm pretty sure she flirts with him in order for Ryan to do her bidding one time.
Daisy is using her femininity and her fluttery eyes to try and seduce Ryan into doing her work. Davey Moore definitely did a lot more playing around with the gender roles in the show, not just with Ryan and Daisy, but also with Gordon and Rebecca too.
Thomas, with his main character syndrome, is every so often given this female character to will they won't they with. See Lady, Rosie, and especially Ashima. Like seriously, he's even blushing next to Ashima on the DVD cover.
But I think the biggest episode dealing with relationships in the show has to be Rosie Is Red. Alright, you all knew this one was coming. This is probably one of the most divisive Thomas episodes, because it's the only episode to directly deal with relationships in Thomas. Thomas. So it's Valentine's Day on Sodor, and Diesel shunts into Rosie, and Thomas begins to defend her, but then Diesel fires back by saying,
"Or are you just sticking up for Rosie because she's your favourite?"
We even get this mention about kisses.
Thomas and Rosie sitting in a tree. K-I-S-S-I-N-G.
And he even calls them special friends. Like, what?
Thomas is your special friend. Special friend.
I totally get what Davey Moore was going for here, surprisingly. The episode is essentially a metaphor for the teasing that boys and girls face in school. Basically, Diesel, Bill and Ben represent Thomas's teasy school classmates. Like, anyone who's been to a same-sex school can tell you firsthand that this teasing about, ooh, Thomas and Rosie, was a very common thing. Like, that was the metaphor that Davey Moore was going for here. Like, don't get me wrong, I like the story that's being told here. It feels like a very real thing that young boys and girls will deal with on playgrounds, and it has a very nice message too. Hell, they even have Henrietta and Toby in the episode giving advice to Thomas. Again, a very good use of that older couple. I just don't personally think this type of metaphor is something that can really be done in Thomas, because this episode just opens so many weird and confusing questions on how the Thomas universe works. Like Diesel using the term special friends, which is obviously a placeholder name for boyfriend or girlfriend.
Thomas is your special friend.
But then Davey Moore realized, oh wait, girlfriend sounds too weird, so he just replaced it with special friend. But like, the term special friend implies that it's possible in the Thomas universe for them to have quote-unquote special friends. Then you have Bill and Ben talking about Rosie and Thomas kissing, but like, can engines kiss?
K-I-S-S. Oh, kissing!
No, of course engines can't kiss. Oh, this episode's just so weird. In conclusion, I do think the engines can have relationships, but only if it works within Awdry's original metaphor of the engines being real engines. I think that's why people like Toby and Henrietta, because I think it actually works with both a real relationship and Awdry's original metaphor.
Now, with all this coming from a statement that a man with a traditional perspective made in the 60s, I'm happy to acknowledge that times have changed and we have more balanced gender roles in the series now. Female engines, male coaches, non-binary diesels, etc. And one thing that the later TV series deserves credit for is showing how it's not really a case of one owning the other and thus their spouse. Henrietta, like the queen she is, reverses this trope in one episode, so that it's no different from saying my husband or my wife. Anyway, it's about time I get back to the shed to make more videos. Thanks for having me here, Adam, and I hope you all enjoy your day.
Have a happy Valentine's Day, everyone. I hope you all are with your special friends, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Bye!
Slán Abhaile.